During World War II, the Soviet Union and Russian military services recruited over 40,000 dogs against the German army. These dogs were called anti-tank dogs and were used against German tanks. This was a task that required intensive training for the dogs, and the Soviet army did not have a special training school for this purpose. Therefore, in 1935, circus trainers and some divas were also trained for this purpose. Many animal scientists were also included in this endeavor. The idea was to attach explosives to the dogs and send them to the enemy's tanks. When they reached the tanks, the dog would bite a lever with its teeth and the bomb would fall off, and the dog would return to its trainer. Then, the bomb would be detonated either by a timer or remote control. If we talk about the German Shepherd trend, that a group was trained, but even after 6 months of training, no dog could achieve expertise in this task. The reason was that they were being trained on a stationary tank, and when they were tested at a new location and in front of a moving tank, the dogs would become confused about where to place the bomb. Also, there were enough chances that dogs could return with unexploded bombs. If a time bomb was attached to the dog, it would come back and the bomb could explode on the Soviet side. A new idea was implemented to tackle it. This time, bombs were attached to dogs that would explode upon contact with anything. It seems that the dogs would also be killed. To change this new idea into reality, the dogs were first kept hungry and given training that their food is hanging under the tank. As soon as the dogs jump under the tank, the detonator is activated and they, along with the tank, are destroyed. Previously, the dogs were trained in a fake battlefield scenario where they had to jump under a moving tank and were also exposed to the sounds of gunshots and explosions. The only fake thing during the training was the bomb attached to them. After several months of training, they had learned to jump under a tank and were now ready for actual war. A dozen dogs were fitted with mines and were used in the first instance on a German tank in 1941. The Soviets had no idea of the huge loophole in their training. On the actual battlefield, the abandoned dogs of the Soviets were running towards their tanks, and the Germans did not have to do anything. The Germans themselves were surprised at the Soviets' new method, but most of them refused to crawl under the tanks. Instead, they returned to the Soviet side in a panic due to German soldiers' fire and exploded between them. The Soviets could not understand why these dogs were not crawling under the German tanks. Now the dogs that were returning had become attached to the Soviets. Therefore, they decided that any dog that returned would be shot on the spot. 30 dogs exploded, 4 hit the correct targets, 6 returned and exploded, 3 were killed by Germans, and the rest were taken by German soldiers. The real reason for this was still unknown. They thought that at least to some extent, the German tanks were still being targeted, so they continued to release more dogs and killed those who returned. On the other hand, the Germans had also learned well about anti-tank dogs. They killed any dog that was advancing toward them, be it a launch dog or a dog that was left behind after the tank explosion. It was perhaps the event in which the most dogs were killed. Later it was discovered that the diesel engines were installed in the tanks that were trained to crawl underneath, while the German tanks ran on petrol. The diesel smell was familiar to the dogs, and when they were sent to the German tanks, their sense of smell led them to the friendly Soviet tanks. It was a long time before the Soviets discovered the real reason. Thousands of trainers had already lost their dogs after seeing them die in front of them. This was the reason why the Soviet idea had failed miserably, and after 1942, the Japanese Imperial Army also adopted this idea against America in 1943. America also started training dogs after seeing their success. These dogs were called demolition wolves by America. Bomb dogs would go into Japanese bunkers and explode. However, the US also faced the same problem that most dogs would return instead of going into the bunker. For several months, there was no specific solution for the dogs to return. Therefore, in December 1949, America also lost the battle and terminated the Demolition Wolves program due to safety reasons. This was the story of anti-tank dogs. But do you know that in World War II, guided missiles were also being developed that were controlled not by humans but by pigeons? Yes, pigeons can also be trained to carry out missions. In this video, you can see two pigeons playing with a ball with their feathers. As soon as the ball touches the other pigeon, a small feeder opens for the shooting pigeon, where it is given food as a reward. But the question is, can a pigeon play ping pong with a missile? How did they operate? To train the pigeon, it was placed in a harness and then a circle was rotated in front of it. The pigeon was trained to peck at this circle, and if it pecked at the circle in front of it, it would be given food. Once the pigeon completed this first training phase, a metal strap was attached to its beak, which was connected to a wire. Whenever the pigeon pecked at its target, a warship image was displayed in place of the metal piece. The pigeon, which had already undergone sufficient training, had no difficulty keeping this warship image in the center of the window. Similarly, using this mechanism, the input signal of the pigeon's beak was used to launch a guided missile in which the pigeon would be inside the missile. Whenever the missile began to move away from the target, the pigeon's beak signal would adjust the missile's radar and bring it back toward the target. American psychologist B.F. Skinner, who was behind this project, had successfully conducted this experiment, and the U.S. Navy had almost approved this missile. However, by 1953, electronic guided missile technology had become quite advanced, so Skinner's project was discontinued. But that does not mean that the use of birds was discontinued entirely after that. Birds are still being used as weapons today. The Dutch police have trained eagles that can take down drones in the air. Falcons and sea lions also can hack ropes and retrieve objects from the water. This torpedo missile, shown on the screen, was estimated to have been produced on an excess basis in 1890. We hope that you will also like and share this video. We are extremely grateful for your loving comments. Stay tuned for the next amazing video.